The day we've been waiting for has finally arrived. In just a few moments, we're going to be receiving the call with the results from the genetic test that I took back on July 16th of this year. So when I received the call, it's about an hour-long call with a genetic counselor, and she is going to be interpreting the results and telling us, hopefully, what gene mutation is causing my retinitis pigmentosa. So we don't know what the results are yet. We haven't seen anything, but we're hoping, since this is a comprehensive genetic test, that it's actually going to come back conclusive and that the geneticist can actually tell me what gene mutation is causing my RP. So we're going to find out. The call is going to be happening here soon. I should be receiving a call within about 10 minutes. And then we're just going to be taping that call. I'll have my phone on speakerphone, and hopefully we can record all or most of the call so that you can actually hear it too. So if you are someone who has taken this genetic test and you're waiting on your results, I just want to give you, from my perspective, how long it took and things like that. So like I said, I took the test back on July 16th, and today is currently October 18th. So I actually received the call last Monday to schedule the genetic counselor appointment that I'm going to do today. So as of last Monday, it was 11 weeks. So now if you did take this test and you're waiting for your results, just know that the lab that's processing these tests was, from what I heard, was inundated with a lot of these tests coming in. So originally we were told that it would take roughly 4 to 6 weeks, but since the lab was so inundated with all of these tests, they actually got backed up quite a few weeks. So if you're still waiting, just be patient. You will get the call. So it took almost 3 months for me to get the call for this genetic test. So if you're waiting, just be patient, and you will get the call here hopefully sometime soon. So yeah, we're excited to hear the results, and hopefully they have an answer for us as far as the gene mutation that is causing it. So stay tuned, and we will tape the call, and hopefully it's helpful. And Corey, do you have any input as to what we're about to hear?
I don't think so. We're going to try and ask the questions that we have, so we're just kind of doing our best, and we just hope that maybe this call helps somebody else so that they know what to expect, and maybe it'll help you guys fuel your own questions when you talk to the genetic counselor. I think that would be about it. Yeah,
exactly. And I know that we have quite a few subscribers and people who follow us here on the channel who have taken the genetic test, possibly as a result of us talking about it a few times in previous videos. So I really hope that this video is helpful to you, so you have an idea of what to expect when you actually do receive the call for the genetic testing appointment. So stay tuned, and we will tape the call for you in just a few minutes. Thanks again.
By the Foundation Fighting Blindness. And I'm curious to know if these test results have been shared with you at all by your doctor's office, or if you were mostly waiting for this phone appointment to hear about them.
No, they have not shared anything with me, so yes, I've just been waiting for this appointment.
Okay, all right, great. I just want to make sure we're on the same page about all that, but I do have your results here that we'll be able to go over today.
Okay.
And just to help me understand and interpret these results better, I have some questions for you first about your symptoms and your diagnosis.
Okay.
And then we'll also review some information about your family history, just to help me understand if there are any patterns I should be thinking about in your family.
Okay.
And I do see that you have gone through genetic testing before and spoken to one of my colleagues about a year and a half ago. At this point, do you remember that whole process?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right, great. So I still have some of the notes on file from that conversation, so we don't have to start at the very beginning of your family tree and all that.
Okay.
Okay. But to start, can you tell me a little bit more about how old you were when you first noticed any problems or changes with your vision, and how you ended up being diagnosed after that?
Sure. So I would say we started noticing when I was in my early teens, possibly even before that, maybe like 11, 12-ish age. And how we noticed was when I was in school or even at home, if I ever dropped anything on the floor, I would look down to find it, and it would take me a while to find it. And a while, I mean maybe it could take 30 seconds or maybe a couple minutes. And I would just look all over, and I could never find what it was that I dropped. And I noticed that my parents or my brother or anybody else would look down at the floor and see it immediately. So we started noticing that, something wasn't right. And then also when I would be outside, maybe playing catch with my dad or my brother, they would throw the ball to me, and maybe 1 out of 10 throws, I wouldn't see the ball. So I would completely miss it. So then we noticed, something isn't right. So I would say those were the earliest symptoms. And then I was diagnosed when I was 15.
Okay. Okay. And that was with retinitis pigmentosa?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, was your vision good enough around that time to be able to get a learner's permit or a driver's license?
Yes, I did drive until I was 21, actually almost 22. So I drove for I got my license when I was 18, so I drove for about 3 years.
Okay. Alrighty. And how would you describe your current level of vision?
Light perception, that's probably about it.
Okay. Alrighty. So, do you use any specific tools or devices to help with your reading, like any magnifiers or screen readers, or more like voiceover technology?
I actually use a little bit of both. I mostly use voiceover technology. I do have a magnifier, but I've noticed that that's not even very helpful anymore either.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. And as your vision was kind of changing over time, did you ever notice that it was affecting your color vision, like being able to tell colors apart from each other?
Yes, I would say my color vision was mostly fine, probably until maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And from then on, I can tell the difference between contrasts now. Like it has to be a very dramatic contrast difference. But other than that, I can't tell the difference between colors.
Okay. Okay. Alrighty. And have you had any complications in your eyes that might be related to the RP, like any signs of early cataracts or any swelling or fluid pockets in your retina?
No, not that I know of. I have been seen, a few times in the last few years, and I've asked if I have cataracts, and they say it's very mild.
Do you have
Okay.
any vision?
Okay, so you don't need surgery or anything like that?
No.
Okay. All right, great. And at this point, would you feel, or kind of as your vision changed over time, do you feel like your vision was best in low light or full light?
It varies. I have very poor night vision, but at the same time,
Okay.
in the dark, it creates a high contrast situation, so it's actually somewhat easier for me.
Okay.
But the sunlight is also very difficult too because it's so bright. So
Okay.
I realize that's a really vague answer, but I guess there was no real perfect
That's all right.
or ideal lighting situation.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Now, mobility-wise, have you gone through cane training? Do you use a cane or a dog, or more rely on, sighted guides around you?
Yeah,
What do you prefer?
I rely on sighted guides. I have not gone through formal training. I do have a cane which I carry with me occasionally in some instances. So, for example, when I go to the airport when I'm traveling, I always have a cane with me then. And then occasionally around just the community, like when I go to the gym, I bring a cane with me. But other than that, I mostly rely on sighted guides.
Okay. Okay. All right, great. And have you ever gotten involved with any specific, like support groups or family groups out there for other people who have RP or related conditions, like Foundation Fighting Blindness or anything similar to that?
We do attend the Foundation Fighting Blindness chapter meetings when they're here in Minneapolis. Other than that, we do participate in a couple Facebook groups, and I do actually have a YouTube channel where it kind of focuses about me and my life with low vision and losing my vision. So I've actually connected with quite a few people on there. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. of RP, have you ever been diagnosed with any other significant health issues before, besides with your vision? Like any hearing problems, heart problems, kidney problems, anything like that?
No, nothing.
Okay. Okay, and do you take any vitamins or supplements right now?
No, I don't.
Okay. Your new genetic test results here, so we can go over those. And just as a background for genetic testing, you're probably aware that genetic information is all of that information that programs our bodies how to grow and develop and function from the very beginning.
Yes.
Very much like a blueprint or an instruction manual for how to build a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that information is written out in a code called DNA. And then if we separate out the DNA instructions into each individual instruction that your body can understand, those individual instructions are called the genes.
Mm-hmm.
So each gene has a very specific job to do and a very particular function in the human body. And in total, humans have over 20,000 different genes that make us who we are, all doing different things.
Okay.
But we think probably a couple hundred of those genes then are the ones that are most important for our eyes and our vision and keeping the retina tissue healthy over time.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, if any of those genes are not working correctly or they're not doing their job within the retina, that can lead to damage and vision loss that we see with retinitis pigmentosa.
Okay.
But that said, it's really hard to tell just by looking into someone's eyes which gene might be causing that problem in the first place, because there's so many possibilities. And so that's why genetic testing is useful to us here, because it allows us to read through all the DNA letters of each gene to try to figure out which one contains the spelling mistake or an abnormality that would cause RP.
Okay.
Okay. So the first test that you went through a year or two ago through the SPARK program, that was a test that looked at just 31 of those genes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that test came back to be inconclusive. But this test through the Foundation Fighting Blindness is a much broader test. It looks at over 260 genes,
Okay.
all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And through all of that testing, it appears that your results are positive or likely positive, in that it looks like we found the right answer for your type of RP.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here, but just know that I will be sending you a summary of this information after our conversation today, so don't feel like you have to remember it all perfectly the first time through.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure. But the name of this gene that appears to be the cause of your RP is called Cerkl, but it's spelled Cerkl.
Okay.
So that's the name of the code name for the gene. And this Cerkl gene, like almost every gene in our body, we all have two copies of it. One that we inherited from our mom and one that we inherited from our dad.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that this gene causes RP is if both copies of that gene are abnormal in some way. So they both contain a mutation.
Okay.
So that's an inheritance pattern called recessive inheritance, when you have to inherit mutations from both your mother and your father together to have that condition.
Okay.
Okay. So if this gene were the right answer, the right cause for your RP, that means we would expect to find two mutations in this gene, one from each parent.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found is that you have one clear disease-causing mutation in this gene, plus a second variation in the gene that's called a variant of uncertain significance.
Okay.
Okay, so these variants of uncertain significance, these happen a lot in genetic testing, and it just reminds us that we don't know everything there is to know about all the genes yet. But essentially, that's a change in your DNA sequence in this gene that's different than other people's DNA, but we don't have enough evidence about it to know, is it actually a disease-causing difference, or is it just a normal human variation that makes you different from the next person, but without causing any problems?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But, paired up with the first mutation that we found in this gene, that's really quite suspicious to me, that variant of uncertain significance is actually disease-causing.
Okay.
It's just that the lab, they're very conservative, and they don't want to jump to any conclusions that we haven't been able to provide evidence for.
Mm-hmm.
So one step we can take to try to learn more about that uncertain variant is something the lab has already done, which is they plug in your genetic data into their computer programs to let the computer models predict if that variant is disease-causing or not.
Okay.
So all of those computer models agree that this variant is probably disease-causing. Now, that's not the same as studying the variation in a human being, so we can't rely on the computer models to tell us for sure what's going on, but that does kind of add another layer of evidence for us that this is the right answer for your RP.
Okay.
Another step we could take to try to prove that this gene is the right cause would be that we should prove that one of these variants was inherited from your mother and one from your father. I presume that that's the case, but your DNA test doesn't actually prove if these variants occur on opposite copies of the gene or if they occur together on the same copy of the gene.
Okay.
Okay. If we were to find out that these variants occur together on the same copy of the gene, in other words, if they were both inherited from the same parent, then that really means that only one copy of the gene is truly abnormal, and that would be enough to cause or explain your type of RP.
Okay.
So I expect, that these were inherited from opposite parents in order for this to be the right answer, but that would be a good thing or a helpful thing to prove to help build the evidence here.
Okay.
So the best way to do that, if it's possible, would be to test your parents for these variations. And that type of testing would be covered by the Foundation Fighting Blindness, so there wouldn't be any extra cost to them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think your parents would be available and willing to go through that type of testing?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, great. And do your parents live in the same area as you, around Minnesota, or do they live somewhere else?
Yes, they live here in Minnesota.
Okay. All right, great. The reason I ask that is because the easiest way to complete family member testing is to have it ordered by your same retinal doctor that ordered your test.
Okay.
And so, every doctor's office is different about, their process. But if you have a follow-up appointment coming up that's already planned, perhaps your parents could go along with you to that appointment to get their testing, or perhaps your doctor's office would be okay with them coming in separately just to do the testing.
Okay. So they would go through the same genetic testing process that I went through?
Well, it's a little bit different. So it's a little abbreviated for them because they don't have to get fully signed up for My Retina Tracker since they haven't been diagnosed with anything themselves. And for their testing, we would do very targeted testing. So instead of looking at all 260 genes on the panel, we would just zoom in on this one gene called Cerkl to look for the mutations that you have.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so from that, we don't expect that we would find any unexpected information in your parents. We're really just following up on your results to confirm where these variants came from.
Sure, okay.
And again, I fully expect that your mom carries one of these variants and your dad carries the other one. But even if we prove that they're genetic carriers, we wouldn't expect that to have any impact on your parents' vision now or in the future.
Sure.
Okay, so it's possible that, if we can prove that your genetic variants are on opposite copies of the gene, that might be enough evidence to convince the lab to kind of upgrade the classification from uncertain significance to a disease-causing category.
Okay.
It is possible, though, that we could go through all this testing even for your parents, and it still wouldn't be quite enough evidence for the lab to change their interpretation, but it would still be another piece of the puzzle overall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But even before we proceed with testing with your parents, I have to people who have mutations in the Cerkl gene. It also causes retinitis pigmentosa, and it's not uncommon for it to involve the central vision in the central area of the retina, called the macula, a bit earlier than other types of RP. So I don't know if that agrees specifically with what your retinal specialist has found or what they've discussed with you, but kind of based on, the progression of your vision loss, it sounds like that could be the case, and this gene could be a good fit.
Right. That would seem to make sense to me.
Okay. So I'll pause there for a second because that was a lot all at one time. What questions do you have about those results or kind of the next steps for now?
I think it was pretty interesting. I think that was, yeah.
Certainly.
So I guess just one question that came to mind is, how common is this Cerkl gene? I mean, does it seem like a pretty common one from what you experience or from what you know?
Yeah. So I would say this is definitely not the most common gene. I actually did speak to one other individual within the last month or so who tested positive in this gene. So it's not ultra rare, but I wouldn't say it's one of the most common. Let's see if I can kind of find out a little bit more about its prevalence. The genes, it's a well-established cause of RP, so it's, not really a gene that has a questionable role like some of the newer ones that we've discovered. And some people who have mutations in this gene might even be clinically diagnosed with a related condition called cone rod dystrophy.
Okay.
Which is, as you may know, kind of the opposite of RP in that it affects your central vision before the outside vision. But sometimes it can kind of seem like that in people who have this type of vision loss.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Alrighty, so, well, this is interesting. So the source I'm looking at here to kind of look at the prevalence of this gene, of everyone who has retinitis pigmentosa, it looks like the best information we have about this gene is actually in Spanish populations, like from Spain.
Okay.
And so in people from Spain or of Spanish ancestry, it looks like this gene accounts for about 3 to 4% of people who have RP.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that really extends, if we can extend that to all ethnic backgrounds, or if it would be lower in other ethnic backgrounds.
Okay.
But overall, that tells me it's kind of a small slice of the pie, but it's not the rarest gene out there.
Okay.
So as of today, I'm not aware of any clinical trials that are targeted at this Cerkl gene specifically, like there are for some other genes at this point. So we never really know what's going to come down the pipeline in the future, but as of today, I'm not aware of any gene therapy trials for Cerkl specifically.
Okay.
But, now that we've all but confirmed that this is the gene that's causative for your type of RP, that gives us a good gene to kind of monitor for with new research to know that that's the type of gene, or that's the type of gene research that you would probably qualify for.
Yeah. So now, just a really quick question. Typically, when researchers are finding a population or a gene to study to find or to create a clinical trial, what percentage of the population of people with RP do they look at people? I mean, do they look at a percentage as low as 3 or 4% to conduct a genetic test? Or I mean, not a genetic test, a clinical trial, or do they look for percentages more like 10 or 20%?
Yeah, so actually I don't think they base it purely on how common a gene is.
Okay.
Because even the one other gene that we have an approved gene therapy treatment for called RPE65,
Yeah.
that's the gene that has a gene therapy called Luxturna.
Right.
I would say that that gene is about as common as Cerkl in people who are diagnosed with RP.
Okay.
It's a little bit more common in people who are diagnosed with an earlier form called Leber's congenital amaurosis. But it's still, that RPE65 gene is nowhere near the most common gene out there that causes retinal disease. And so it's interesting that they picked that gene first, but I think some of the reasons that fed into that were that the RPE65 gene is a pretty small gene, so it was easy for them to work with and easy for them to, develop a way to insert it into people's eyes in their retina. And what's really interesting is they found actually a naturally occurring breed of dog that had that type of blindness related to the dog version of RPE65.
Okay.
So that was sort of a happy coincidence, but that means that they had a natural occurring animal model, and they were actually able to treat blindness in dogs before they ever treated it in humans.
Okay.
So I think that all kind of, all those things came together to help them study the RPE65 gene.
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging to hear. Yep.
Yeah. So from here on out, I don't know if they'll, sort of select the genes that they feel like are easiest to work with, or the ones that affect most people, or some sort of, happy medium in there.
Yeah.
But I would say that this Cerkl gene is it's a well-known gene. It's a well-established gene in the world of RP, even though it's not the most common. So, and it's inherited in the same way that RPE65 is, in that recessive pattern.
Sure.
So I think all of those things make it a reasonable research target in the future. It's just hard to predict, when that will roll around.
Okay.
Now, as part of your participation in this Foundation Fighting Blindness testing program, though, I know that you must be signed up with the My Retina Tracker registry online. Is that right?
I am, yes.
Okay. So I will be adding your test results to your profile online. So it'll all be linked up together. And I'll be able to specify the types of mutations that you have, one being a known disease-causing mutation and one being a variant of uncertain significance.
Okay.
But from there, then the Foundation Fighting Blindness will be able to know that you tested likely positive in this gene. And so if there are any new opportunities or updates about this gene, they'll have a good way to contact you to give you that information.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
So that's the best way I can think of to kind of put yourself out there to hear about the updates.
Okay.
And let's see, what else?
Can we ask a few more questions?
Also,
sorry.
There are, other areas of research going on to treat RP and other retinal diseases where it doesn't matter if you've gone through genetic testing or if you've confirmed your gene or not. So, this type of test result wouldn't preclude you from participating in other types of research, such as perhaps like stem cells or, similar types of treatments.
Okay.
And to be honest, for someone like yourself who has sort of an advanced stage of RP with significant vision loss at this point, stem cells may end up being the more effective treatment in your case, more so than gene therapy. Because we expect that for gene therapy, or our number one hope for gene therapy is that it can preserve a person's vision and, keep it from getting worse over time. But we don't really expect that gene therapy can improve a person's vision or restore the cells that have already died away. Compared to stem cells, that approach to research is really trying to develop new healthy retina cells that can be then injected into a person's eyes or transplanted. And perhaps that has a better possibility of actually restoring a person's vision.
Yeah, right.
Regardless of the gene that caused the damage in the first place.
Okay.
So those are all things to think about. Now knowing which gene is the probable cause for your RP, definitely adds another piece to the puzzle here. But there's still, a few different ways or a few different routes that you can take it if you're interested in research.
Yeah. I'm just so glad it came back positive that we actually have something conclusive here versus just inconclusive like the last one. So at least we have something to work with. It's encouraging at least.
Right. Yeah. Now you can kind of more focus your energy a little bit more on like which research,
Right.
to be following.
Yeah, exactly.
Over time.
Do you mind if we ask a few more questions?
There is. Oh, what's that?
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, to be clear, there is still a possibility, although I think it's slim, that this gene is a coincidental result and isn't actually the right answer for your RP.
Okay.
With the one variant being classified as uncertain significance, that leaves a tiny possibility that this isn't the right answer for your RP after all. But based on the information that we have, I think it's very likely.
Okay.
So I guess I would say it's not 100% conclusive, but it is pretty close to that. It's very suspicious.
Yeah, exactly. So then once my parents go through the testing, that would confirm or at least give a little bit more weight into this gene that they found, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would certainly add more weight. And if we confirm that each of them carries one variant, and if the lab is then able to reclassify the variant of uncertain significance to be disease-causing, if we build enough evidence for that, then at that point, then that would confirm that this is the right gene that caused your RP.
Sure.
So we're just a step or two away from there, but I think, it's very likely that this gene is the right answer.
Okay. Cool. Would it be all right if we ask a few more questions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, hi, I'm Corey. I'm Matt's wife. We just had made a list of a couple questions. Sorry, I've been listening this whole time.
No worries at all.
So one question that's come up since we heard the results are, so I know that this gene you said causes, obviously the Cerkl gene causes RP and also possibly like rad cone dystrophy. Is there any other things that this gene cause? Or I don't even know if I'm asking this right, but does it do any other stuff? Like,
yeah, that's a good question. So this is a gene that we think only causes retinal disease. We don't think it causes any other types of medical issues. We don't expect it to cause any hearing problems, kidney issues, anything else, fortunately.
Okay. Good.
And primarily people who test positive in this gene are diagnosed with RP. But what makes this type of RP a little bit unique compared to other people's is that it does affect the central vision a little bit earlier than usual with other types of RP.
Okay. Great, thank you.
That's probably not the case for everybody, but that's kind of a pattern that we've seen. But yes, it appears that it only affects the retina at all.
Okay.
Another question that I have, and this is going to sound vague, it's just from reading stuff online, honestly, is, so I know it sounds like every gene has a specific like job it does to help the retina. Does this one, is there like a certain like protein or vitamin or something that this is like lacking? Like if there's like a supplement or a dietary thing he could do to like help? Or is that I don't know if that question makes sense. Maybe it's kind of multiple questions.
At this point, we don't know if there's any specific vitamins or supplements that can slow down the progression of RP in general.
Okay.
One that you may come across a lot online related to RP is vitamin A, because there was a lot of research done a couple decades ago to see if high-dose vitamin A could actually slow down the progression of RP, because we know vitamin A is really important for the visual cycle. But they kind of got conflicting results from that, and we still don't have any good evidence that high-dose vitamin A can actually change the course of a person's RP. And beyond that, high-dose vitamin A can have side effects in other body systems, especially the kidneys and the liver. And so that doesn't apply to everybody, but that makes a lot of people wary of taking it because they don't want to treat one problem and then cause a different problem.
Right.
So it kind of depends on which retinal specialist you talk to. You'll probably get all different opinions about vitamin A, but that's really the one that's been studied the most in RP.
Okay.
Okay.
And in trying to look up, I'm going to see what I can find out here about the function of this Cerkl gene specifically. Some of these genes we know more about than others.
Can I ask another question while you're looking it up?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Is the Cerkl, you know how you said the RP65 is small? What I didn't even know that was size is like an option for these. But do you know what is this size like? What size is this one? Is it small too?
Let's see here.
Or maybe that's another thing to look up.
Yeah, so let's see if I can. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
But it's kind of like basically, so every gene carries the instructions to make a final gene product, which is usually a protein that can either serve as like an enzyme or a signaling molecule, but each protein has its own job to do in the cell. And so those proteins can be different sizes depending on how many building blocks make up each protein. And so, let's see, so this Cerkl protein is predicted to be made up of 532 amino acids. Let me see how that compares. And then the gene itself, how big is that? So Cerkl, okay, I told you it's 532 amino acids in the protein. And then they predict that RPE65 is about 533 amino acids, which is almost the same size. So that tells me that the gene itself, the genetic instruction, is probably close to the same size for each one, maybe not exactly the same. But yeah, it appears that they're actually fairly close to the same size.
Okay.
As far as I can tell. So I think that, it kind of makes it a good target as well, because it means it could potentially, if it is close to the same size, it means it could be packaged into the same type of transporter that was used with the RPE65 gene therapy, presumably.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you asked that, because I didn't realize there was so much similarity there.
I didn't even know any part of that was a thing, so I'm glad too.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, so the way that they basically package human genes to use for gene therapy is they have to find a way to get them into the human tissue, and then more importantly, to replicate themselves once they're inside the human tissue, so that it can make more and more functional copies of the gene.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they do that is they use modified viruses, but certain viruses, they're called viral vectors, which are basically transporters. So they don't cause any illnesses, but they can accommodate some human DNA when they manipulate them. But those little viral vectors are all different sizes. So if you have an enormous gene that doesn't fit into that virus, then you have to get creative with how to actually get it into the human tissue that you want to treat. But there's different size viruses too that they can sort of play around with. So it's all all very interesting. But like, for example, some of the genes that cause Usher syndrome, and probably some types of RP, those genes are huge. And so they wouldn't fit in the same type of virus that the RPE65 gene fit into.
Okay.
Okay.
So just so we
all
can,
these special considerations when they
yeah,
research each different gene.
it's so interesting.
Yeah. This is
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can better understand this a little bit more, this gene. So if I did have a child, what is the likelihood they would have RP or be a carrier of it?
Great question.
And does it
So,
matter the gender of that child?
Yeah, so we know, or we presume now, that with the Cerkl gene being the probable cause for your RP, that means that you would have one mutation on both copies of your gene. And then when any of us go on to have children, we'll pass on one copy of each of our genes to them, but not both. So any children that you would have would get one copy of the gene from you and one copy of the gene from Corey.
Okay.
So we know that no matter which copy of the gene they inherit from you, it must contain a mutation. So that means by default, all of your children would be genetic carriers for the condition, but with one mutation. But carriers don't have any symptoms. And then most likely, they'll get a regular functional copy of the gene from Corey, which tells me they would probably not have retinitis pigmentosa. The only chance they would have of having the same type of RP as you is if they inherited a second gene mutation, if Corey was a carrier.
Okay.
Now, I never get to say never. I never get to give anyone a 0% chance of that happening, but
Right.
it presumably would be very unlikely for that to happen because these genes individually are quite rare in the general population.
Okay, so the child would carry it, but most likely wouldn't have symptoms.
Exactly.
Okay. So,
Right. So very low chance of any future generation. So your children or grandchildren, very low chance for them to have RP.
okay.
Usually these recessive forms of RP only affect one generation. So the highest chance would have been for your siblings to also have it, but for future generations, it's a very low chance.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question. What is the likelihood that my brother has it, but possibly isn't seeing any symptoms from it?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty unlikely. It seems like everyone who has two mutations in the gene shows noticeable symptoms of it. And we would expect him to show those symptoms, by now, kind of close to the age that you were when you showed your symptoms. So genetically, if we presume that both of your parents are carriers for this, that means that you and your brother, or any other siblings you might have had, would have had a 1 out of 4 chance of inheriting both mutations together and having RP.
Okay.
So each of you would have started with a 25% chance of inheriting the condition. But presuming and kind of seeing that your brother is not affected with RP, we wouldn't be able to tell if he's a genetic carrier or if he has 0 mutations at all.
That's
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's a whole lot of kind of a sequence of events that all have to happen pretty perfectly
Right.
to have this recessive type of RP.
do you think that I know you can't really maybe answer this, but would there be any reason for me to get tested for the Cerkl gene? I mean, in case if I have that?
Yeah, it's a fair question because, that would really be the only way to know if your children have an increased chance of having this type of RP. So that type of testing is available. We know how to look at the whole sequence of the Cerkl gene in you. My only concern would be if you pursued that type of testing is that if it's a clearly positive result or a clearly negative result, that's good information to have. Those are easier results to interpret. But sometimes we get these results like the variant of uncertain significance. DNA, but we don't actually know if that could cause RP in a child or if it's just one of those normal human variations.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be really my biggest concern with that type of testing is if we found one of those variants of uncertain significance, what would we do with that information? It'd be difficult to interpret. But if you find yourself sort of thinking about this a lot and really worry that you could carry a mutation in this gene, however low the chance, just know that that type of testing is available. It's just not always able to give us 100% clear answers.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, and no one's genes are going anywhere. So if that's testing that you're interested in this year or a few years down the road, we essentially expect to get the same information at either time point.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. Do you have other questions?
I don't really think I do. Do you, Matt?
Okay.
I don't think so at the
I
moment.
don't either.
Well, there is just a little bit more information that I want to give you about your genetic test results just so there aren't
Okay.
any surprises on the report that I sent to you.
Sure.
And that is that in addition to the Cerkl gene that we detected as the likely answer for your RP, there were a couple of other genes that we detected variations in as well, but they're probably not linked to your diagnosis. They're probably like coincidental results.
Okay.
One of those is a variant of uncertain significance that was already detected on the Spark testing that you had. So I don't know if you remember talking about that much because it was a while ago, but it's a gene called CNGA1. And that is another gene that can cause retinitis pigmentosa in a recessive fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So if that gene had anything to do with your condition, we would expect to find 2 mutations in that gene again, but we only found a single variant of uncertain significance. So that's not enough to cause any problems.
Okay.
So most likely that's just kind of a normal human variation.
Mm-hmm.
The other change that we found is in it's a mutation in a gene called PCY-T1A. You don't have to remember that.
Okay.
Just another code name for a gene.
Mm-hmm.
But that gene also causes recessive disorders. So just by coincidence, we found out that you're a carrier for this other type of genetic disorder, but it doesn't actually, since it's just a carrier, just one mutation and not 2, it doesn't actually explain your retinal diagnosis.
Okay.
Now,
What is it a
Yeah,
carrier?
what is the gene?
What is it a carrier for?
Yeah. So this one is actually a condition I'm not super familiar with, but it's a
Oh,
condition
great.
that affects bone development and the retina, actually. So people who have mutations in that gene have cone rod dystrophy, but they also have a skeletal condition called spondylometaphyseal dysplasia. And it's basically an abnormality in the way that the bones develop and grow in the body. So somehow this one gene is involved in both bones and retinal function. But
It could be worse.
I was going to say that sounds worse.
I know, it's like, and to be honest, this is the first time that I've ever seen this gene come up. This is a new gene for me, even though it's included on this test. So that tells me it's probably really rare. So I would be even less concerned about Corey being a carrier for this gene because I think it's super rare.
Yeah.
But it's just a coincidental result, and it's just a little bit more that you know about your DNA now that we didn't know before.
Right.
But extra results like this really are very common. Almost everyone that goes through genetic testing has variations in more than one of their genes. So these extra results, they're not concerning to me, and they're not unusual in my mind.
Okay.
I have a question. How common is it to have, like, so you mentioned that a few different, like the 2 different genes, or specifically that ZNGA1 or whatever, and then the one he has anyway, about it having like a variant of unknown significance. How common is that in typical DNA to just like have that sort of variant of unknown significance?
I don't have a great number for you, but it's pretty common.
Okay.
Either it's common to have that type of result in a gene that we think is the answer, and it's also really common to find variants of uncertain significance in genes that we think are unrelated to the diagnosis.
Okay.
Most of those, as we find out more about variants of uncertain significance, most of the time we find out that they're pretty much all benign changes.
Okay.
But the lab didn't want to miss anything, and so they're pretty conservative in the way that they report things. So most of the time, if we find out more about a variant of uncertain significance, especially in sort of like an extra gene like this, we find out that it's benign. And, because we already know that we all have lots of variation in our DNA, and that's why we don't all look alike. It's just that some of those variations happen to pop up in a test like this in the retina genes.
Okay.
These variants of uncertain significance, like I said, they always are a good reminder to me that we just don't know everything yet about every gene in our body. So it's very common to find these changes that we've just never seen in other people before. And that's not limited to people who have RP either. Like I think, so I myself have not been diagnosed with any retinal disorder at this point, and I think that even if I took this test, I would probably have a handful of genetic variants that come back in my DNA too.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't want you to worry about these. I don't think that they're indicative of any extra diagnoses or any extra health risks or anything like that.
Okay.
Did you find anything else I should maybe know about?
Exactly. Keep them coming.
That's all for today. But to be clear, this test, it does just look at the genes that we know are related to retina disease. So, if there were anything concerning in your family about other health risks like cancer or heart disease or anything like that, I wouldn't expect to get that information with this test because we only looked at the retina genes. But I didn't gather from your family history that there was any need to worry about, other inherited conditions.
Right.
If there ever is concern about that, they would just probably order a different genetic test that focuses in on those relevant genes instead of the retina genes.
Okay.
Okay. But yes, I promise that's all we found for today.
Okay, good. So, how do I go? What's that?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how do I go about having my parents tested for this Cerkl gene?
Sure. So we will I'll include a bit about that recommendation in the notes that I send back to you and your doctor.
Okay.
And then your office should have the forms and the kits for what's called family member testing.
Okay.
And so we will ask your doctor to fill out the order forms for your parents, and then they will provide a saliva sample for that testing.
Okay.
So I think the easiest way to do that is to contact your doctor's office after you get the summary note from me and say, hey, I had my genetic counseling appointment. They recommended testing my parents to follow up on my results. And what's the preferred way or what's the easiest way to coordinate that family member testing?
Okay. So with a lot of these genetic tests that are coming in recently from the, this genetic testing that is done through FFB, is this pretty common to test other family members, parents, or siblings? Or is it just specific to...
It is.
Okay.
We usually, if your results have been 100% clear, if we've found 2 clear mutations in the Cerkl gene, then I wouldn't recommend family member testing because that would be pretty much our answer right there. But if there's any uncertainty about a result, and we could, add evidence to your results by testing family members, that's when we recommend it. But that is built into the Foundation's program, so it's a frequent enough recommendation that we have a process for it.
Okay.
And that's pretty consistent across the board in genetics. If we ever find, these variants of uncertain significance, we try to correlate those with other members of the family to help us understand those results better.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask one more question that I just thought of?
Of course. Yeah.
So with the one being clear and the one being a variant of uncertain significance, if both of his parents are tested, and one comes back as having, if one isn't, I guess what I'm wondering is that regardless of the outcome, if we find out that Matt really does have Cerkl, does that change how it's passed on to his offspring?
It wouldn't.
Okay.
So if we find out, though, that, I think there's a small chance of this, but if we find out that both of these results were inherited from the same parent, then that would tell us that both of these variants occurred next to each other on the same copy of the gene, instead of on opposite copies of the gene. And what that would tell me is that in that case, only one copy of the gene is actually abnormal. Even though it has two mutations in it, it's still just one copy of it is abnormal, with the second copy of the gene presumably being normal. And if that's what we find out, then that means that the Cerkl gene would actually not be able to explain Matt's RP.
Oh, okay.
Because we really need to confirm that the mutations are on opposite copies of the gene.
Okay.
One from each parent.
Okay.
So that both copies of the gene are abnormal in effect.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so, if we find out they both came from the same parent and we rule out the Cerkl gene as the right answer, then I still think it would be a low chance for your children, but then we wouldn't be as reassured that we're talking about a recessive type of RP. It sort of opens the door that it actually could be inherited in a different way.
Okay.
If we don't know which gene is responsible.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
I think so.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Well, I know that's a lot of information to kind of cover in one sitting today. Please know if you guys do think of any other questions after our conversation today, you're always welcome to recontact me. You can either send me a message through the online patient portal, or my phone number will be on the cover of the report. And you can feel free to give me a call.
Okay.
But I suspect too, and I should tell you too, after your parents get tested, I don't expect that they'll get individual results themselves, and they won't get their own genetic counseling appointment.
Okay.
But the lab will issue an update to your results.
Okay.
So they'll give us a new report.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, we'll probably talk again over the phone to talk
Sure.
about your updated results and if, any of that information has changed at all.
Okay. Okay.
And of course, if your parents would like to join in on that conversation and that's okay with you, they can kind of hear about their results that way. But since their testing is primarily to give more information to you, you'll be the one that I'll follow up with about that.
Okay. Perfect. So, one last quick question for you.
Of course.
We recorded this conversation just so that we could reference it again. Do you mind if we share it with
Sure.
family members and possibly some other people?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Just knowing that it contains some of your protected health information, but if
Yep.
you're the one that's sharing it,
Okay.
that's okay with me.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
yeah, that should be okay.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much for your help and going through all this with us. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. You're very welcome. And, please let me know if you do think of any other questions along the way. But otherwise, hopefully I'll talk to you again soon once we have a little bit more information back after your parents get tested.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to get them in there and have that test done and then talk to you again in a few months or, whenever we talk again. So.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for your time today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice week. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Did you stop it?
No. Well, we just got the results. There we go.
So yeah, obviously, I don't know what to say. Yeah.
I'm glad Matt's bones are good, because obviously that seemed like kind of a close call on that gene.
Right. So yeah, I'll have my parents go in, hopefully sometime soon, and submit their samples, and then we will probably give you an update again in a few months when we talk to the genetic counselor again with the update to the results. So she sounds pretty confident that the gene is the Cerkl gene causing the mutation, causing the RP. But again, we don't have conclusive evidence that that's the one until my parents actually get tested. So, but she sounds pretty confident, and she goes through this, she sees tons of these every day. So she knows what she's talking about.
I think they're pretty conservative about what they kind of say. I mean, they
Exactly.
seem really conservative. So
They have to be.
I
Yeah.
don't think that she would have talked about her Matt's gene as much if it wasn't pretty likely.
Yeah, but like Corey said, she can't say definitively that's it.
Yeah.
But until it's on paper, which I think it will be once my parents get tested. So very interesting. Very
Yeah.
cool. So I'm excited that it actually came back conclusive rather than inconclusive like the Spark Therapeutics test. But that, like she said, that only tested 31 genes, whereas this one tested over 260. So I'm just excited to have a result. So the culprit is Cerkl.
Yeah.
So we need to hunt this guy down and beat him up a little bit.
Yep, I think
wherever
we
he
need to
is.
rough them up.
So anyway, thanks for watching this. We really appreciate it. And we hope that this is helpful to any of you who possibly had the genetic testing or you're considering it. So yeah, it's a very helpful call. Obviously, you can tell that the genetic counselor is very, very intelligent. She knows what she's talking about. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. Thanks
Thank
again for
you.
watching. See you soon.
Bye-bye.